Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're keeping comfortably cool on this lovely day. Hello, Debbie. It's nice to see you. It's a long time since I've seen you. If you are happy to turn your videos on just while we do the intro, it's really nice for us to see faces. Thank you, Nigel. And the speakers kind of like to see it. It's entirely up to you if you'd like to turn them off during the presentation. That's absolutely fine. So, good afternoon. My name is Lucy Pedler. I'm here with my colleague Elaine, who you will have heard of before. Elaine does all the pre and post event work, and she'll be sending you 3 things at the end of this session. One will be the transcript of the chat. So I'm sure you're all very familiar with this. We're going to have a 15-minute Q&A at the end of this. So put any questions you have in the chat. Just in case you haven't used chat before, it's a little bubble at the bottom. Just make sure you're sending it to everybody. I will look at those questions at about 5:45 and put them to John and Nigel. So that's one thing. The second thing is we send a feedback form, which our speakers really like. So if you can spend a couple of minutes, we'd much appreciate that. And actually, the third thing that we normally send you is a link to the PowerPoints, but you may or may not be happy to hear that Nigel and John aren't doing any PowerPoints this afternoon, just to sort of stop you dying of PowerPoint death. So that's really where we are with that. And what we're talking about this afternoon is the circular economy, but with a specific focus on reducing the environmental impact of light fixtures with whole life costing and the life cycle analysis of lighting. So John and I have worked several times before. We shared a platform when we were doing an RIBA session many moons ago. And I was particularly impressed with John because he's a lighting designer, but he was talking about daylight. Now that's not going to sell a lot of his work by talking about daylight, but actually that is part of his bigger picture view on everything. So that immediately made me think this is somebody I'd like to work with. Nigel I haven't worked with, but he comes recommended by John, so I'm sure we're going to get a great presentation this afternoon. So what we're going to do is we can have a very short intro from Nigel. He's going to set the scene. I mean, we all know about the climate emergency, but he is just going to set it within the context of what we're talking about this afternoon. Then John will come in and talk about specification of lighting fixtures and why we're here. And then we'll have Nigel back in after John. So John, would you like to begin your talk?
Nigel.
Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Nigel, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Lucy. Well, my name is Nigel Harvey. I'm Chief Executive of Light, a WEEE compliance scheme for the lighting industry, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Lucy. And yes, we thought it was appropriate to put this in context because the climate emergency is deadly, deadly serious. And it's somehow very appropriate that this session is happening during the middle of a heat wave. And I looked at my app today. I live in St Albans, and it showed that St Albans was about 30 degrees centigrade. That still, though, is a full 20 degrees centigrade cooler than a place in Pakistan that hit 51 degrees just 6 weeks ago during a heat wave across the Indian subcontinent. And the way the politics of that is playing out is intriguing, because actually the scale of the heat wave meant that the wheat harvest in India was suboptimal. There was a much lower yield. And as a consequence, India, which is a wheat exporter, banned the export of wheat. And that is just one of the ways in which the climate emergency is going to play out globally to us all. We will see increasing food shortages, famines, spiraling food prices, which is going to make what's happening this year on food like a walk in the park. And so getting every part of our life, including what we do in business, to align with limiting the environmental footprint and the carbon emissions of what we do is absolutely crucial. Keeping products in use for longer. reducing waste and energy consumption, all vital ways in which we can reduce emissions. For those who know me, you may know that I'm very much a card-carrying climate activist, and I've been willing to put my personal liberty on the line because I think it is absolutely essential. And I don't think our government is going nearly far enough in terms of putting in the policies in place that will actually make a difference to materially reducing our carbon footprint. So we thought that would be a useful introduction just to remind us of the vital need for us all to be tackling this in our business lives. And I'll now pass over to John to talk about the development of specifications.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel. And I think it's always excellent to get an idea of the end game, even when the end game is actually now, because we can't wait for that end game. There is another context that we need to that we need to get our head around, and the context I'm talking about, we know this on a daily basis because it's what we do. I'm a lighting designer. What does that mean? I talk to people about what they want from their lighting, and I end up doing a lighting layout, and I do a lighting specification. And it doesn't really matter whether you're a lighting designer or whether you're designing mechanical systems or whether you're specifying doors and windows. It's the same process. Now, I think we've got three headline problems that we need to address. Nigel has been talking about one of them. Let me sort of go around the other two. In the lighting industry, and I'm just assuming that there are going to be parallels, we have gone through a technical revolution over the last decade. All the light sources that we are using these days weren't around 20 years ago and were hardly in general use 10 years ago. The LED has driven a horse, a cart, a tank, and several other huge beasts through our industry. It is unregulated. We have a lot of rogue operators. Unfortunately, those who are not part of lighting specifications possibly don't get that, because a light fitting is a light fitting is a light fitting, and therefore if you like, there is room for maneuver. If I come out and I specify a fitting that costs £100, and somebody used to say, but we can get one of those for 50, the chances are you could. But those days are gone, and they've gone with a revolution that has changed the way that light sources work, that has changed the technology that produces them, so that £100 light fitting today, it is very unlikely that a £50 light fitting will do the same job. So we are already being threatened by a value engineering scenario which does not recognize anything other than the capital cost of a fitting. That's our first headline problem. The second one is our environmental crisis, as Nigel mentioned, and I'll just take the three of the crises. The one that we're all talking about is carbon reduction. For us, that means carbon reduction in the way that lighting is used, but we also need to focus on the way that our light fittings are made and what happens next. So carbon reduction at the point of manufacture is to us is an important thing. Waste reduction. One of the byproducts of the LED was that we ended up with a load of light fittings where you used to say, just change the bulb. Well, you can't change the bulb. You've got to throw the entire fitting away. All that aluminium, all that steel, all that plastic, all that glass just has to be recycled if we're lucky. Or Nigel will actually give us another way out on that one later on. And then the third one is akin to that, because we are reaching some crisis points on the ability to extract raw material. We're looking at the end of things like copper. We're looking at the problems with bauxite. If you want to, if you really want to upset some of your friends who enjoy driving around in electric cars, we've got a problem with lithium. So we have got a problem where, so long as we're reliant upon the goodness of the earth to provide the sort of resources we want, then we are in a serious problem. And then the final one I wanted to talk about is we are building poor buildings. That's not me saying that. That was the president of the RIBA saying that at a Future Build a few years back. Why are we building poor buildings? What is a poor building? I mean, we understand if the roof collapses, that's a catastrophically poor building. If mechanical systems collapse, if electrical systems collapse, that again, it might be internal to the building, but that is another issue and another problem. But the one that we need to think about is a chronic failure. It's not something where something falls over, or at least it doesn't fall over obviously. It comes in when someone says, that light fitting that you fixed last week, well, it's gone again. Or, that pump that we replaced a couple of months ago, well, it's not working again. And this is where one of the real problems is coming, because it's affecting the financial viability of building projects. And what we are finding is that the investment side of construction, I mean, these are not our people. These are people who live and work in gorgeous high-rise buildings because they've got an awful lot of money to play with. And they're looking at construction, they're going, I don't know. It's the last time we tried to do this, the return on investment collapsed. But it collapsed over 5 years, or it collapsed over 10 years. And that comes back to the quality of things that we're putting in the building. Now, a couple of quotes for you. The Institute of Directors Economic Confidence Index collapsed from -4 in February this year to -34 a month later. And that's the lowest we've had since 2020. Kitty Usher, who's the chief economist at the Institute of Directors, said, the reality of higher energy and commodity prices, plus the hike in employment taxes, all overlaid with the general climate of deep uncertainty, is now having a real economic impact. Now, these are the people we all rely on, because these are the people who put their money up and give it to us in order that we can do something with it, in order that they can get a return on that money. It's just, they can't put it in the bank. They need to do more with it. And we have to work very positively with these people. So what do? What do they want us to do is the interesting one, because we are starting to see these 3 letters used all the time now, E, S, and G. Is there an ESG strategy? What are your ESG plans? I'm hearing from consulting engineers who say, we will be publicizing our ESG strategy for the business later this year. And all of our work will be based around environment, social, and governance criteria. And another little quote, this one's from JP Morgan. ESG investing is an investment strategy in which environmental, social, and governance factors are integrated into the due diligence and financial analysis of investment managers. Companies that focus on companies that focus on environmental, carbon footprint and renewable energy, social, privacy and data concerns, investments in the community and so on, and governance, board diversity and business ethics, tend to have better and more stable long-term performance. Amid growing evidence of the effectiveness of ESG investing, asset managers who ignore ESG issues may find themselves less and less able to attract and retain assets. Already we hear a common refrain: in a few years, there won't be ESG investing. There will just be investing. Now, the things that I've described that are going wrong can be corrected if we can put those kind of strategies together. because what we are guilty of, and I'll put my hand up to this one, is we are guilty of lazy specification. We are guilty of specifying to the minimum required, as in, I want a fitting that's that big and it lets that amount of light out, and it's a warm color rather than a cold color, and that's all we give. Now the problem is that those companies, those rogue companies, can match that with no problem. But if you're doing the job properly, we will not be looking at CapEx at the point of delivery of the project to the client, because that again is one of our issues. The real point of a specification is that it delivers a quality of service for the period of time that the client expects that building to work. And that's why we need to be looking more towards life cycle analysis. It's a con, it's always been a con, that the idea that contractors have got the clients interested. And if there's any contractors out there, and I'm going to be rude now, so I'm going to apologize in advance for that. There are two end games. There is the build end game, where you look at the specification and you say, I can build that, I can build it on time, and I can build it for a profit. And then all you need to do is wait for the guarantee periods to get out, and you go, right, I'm home free. But the problem with that is that ignores the fact that the client who commissioned the building in the first place might have a 10-year investment, a 50-year investment. If it's a university or if it's a hospital, you know, we might be sort of putting up shopping centers and knocking them down, but there is huge infrastructure which requires sound and good quality cost and understanding of costs when it comes to what we're actually putting in the building. So this is how it does work. I specify a fitting for £100. I've done my sums because I want to work with these people again, so I want to do a decent job. I put that £100 fitting specification into the job documents. Fine, okay. A value engineering exercise takes place, and they say, "What do you want from that?" Well, because I've been lazy, and all I've given is a lumen output and a color temperature and a size, and I've said I'd like it to look like this. Someone will say, "I can get one for half that price." What will happen is, because that's not been tested, because that's not been verified, whereas a decent manufacturer will have all the data, and this is all about data. Tests will have been done, longevity tests will have been done, light deterioration over time tests will have been done, so that we can look at the period of time that the client is looking for. And if that's 10 years, then that's 10 years. If it's 50 years, it's 50 years. It doesn't matter. But if we're talking about a light fitting that we believe will last operating hours, 50,000 operating hours, which is a typical figure for an LED light fixture, that 50,000 hours, if you're burning 5,000 hours a year, there's only 8,760 hours in a year, so 5,000 hours a year is a lot of use. It will still last you for 10 years. And then you can start to say, in 10 years time, we need to do this. We need to now look at something that is not necessarily fully exhausted, but according to our data today, within that period of time, that fitting will reach the stage where it needs to be replaced, or the working bits inside the fitting need to be replaced. So when we're doing life cycle analysis, we're able to look at the fourth dimension. We're able to look at time. We're able to analyze what it actually means when they say that a business is open from, I don't know, 9 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock in the evening. We then ask, does that mean it's fully occupied during those times? Offices, office desks, are they going to be are they occupied 100% of the time? We have a new British standard and European standard called 12464. 12464 has done the remarkable thing of requiring light levels on task on a desk, on a working desk, that if you're old and daft like me, we've doubled the amount of light that should be put on that desk. In fact, I'm of such an age that probably I should be looking for 1,000 lux on that desk. We've been planning offices at 300 lux. Now, the only way that they've managed to do that and still stay on the right side of the energy debate is that they've dropped the lighting levels everywhere else. So instead of having 300 lux from wall to wall, you'll have 120 lux or 150 lux around the circulation. And if you put all of those figures together, you actually make a net saving. But that work has got to be done to prove that. And if you can then say, we reckon that our desks are only occupied 50% of the time. Well, what happens during the 50% of the time when people are not there? We have sophisticated controls, we have sensors. We don't need to burn that energy onto an empty desk. So we have all of these strategies that we can employ to ensure that when we put our figures together, we're able to deliver something that the client can go, I like the sound of that. I understand the numbers. I see where you've come from. This is what we want to do. And at this point, we have to put our hand up and go, by the way, it only works with those fittings, not that fitting, but it only works with those fittings that have got that data. And we have evidence that is actually going to be true. If you put it into your traditional value engineering exercise, it will crash and burn, because the first thing that you do is that you will then buy a fitting that will not last for 50,000 hours. It might only last, believe it or not, for 5,000 hours. You might be changing that fitting every year. And it's not just the cost of a fitting, because the fitting is cheaper, but it's the cost of taking a fitting out, putting a fitting back. It's labor costs that does all the damage here. What we're trying to do is to minimize, it's asset management, if you want to give it a capital A and a capital M. It's asset management from the point of planning. And life cycle analysis needs the conversation across the table with the design team on one side and the client on the other, and we can all have that conversation. And yes, we can all go, actually, we're not sure about this. And it's right. There'll be a whole load of things that we're not going to be sure about. But they can be factored in, and they can be factored in to make a difference. But what we can do through this process, because we'll have the data, we'll have the paperwork, we'll have the people that we know and trust, and the rogues will not be allowed in the room. That's the theory of all of this. The rogues are not allowed into the room, in order that, well, if we come back to what JP Morgan was saying there about the benefit of ESG investment, the building doesn't collapse. You take that system and you take it out of lighting and you take it into the general electrical specification, you take it into the mechanical specification, you take it into the air handling, and you take it into the water systems, you take it everywhere you can. It's the same, as I said right at the start, it's the same process, but it's a process that we have been sorely lacking for many, many years. What's happened for us in the lighting industry is that it has been flagged up in such a critical way. When I have manufacturers saying to me, John, we don't know what to do here, because we know our stuff works, and we've put all the figures together and we've put them all together, and we've just got this numpty who comes in and says, I can do that cheaper. And somehow that's okay. I don't know if it's just magical thinking. I don't know if it's a cognitive dissonance. Maybe nobody's telling the client that this is actually going on until the client realizes that they've been sold a pup. And then it's too late. Then it's too late. Right. That's me ranting on about life cycle analysis and why what we're doing today isn't fit for purpose, hasn't been fit for purpose for a long time, but is certainly not fit for purpose now. At that point, what I've been talking about is a new type of fitting, or an old type of fitting using a new type of light source. Now, Nigel is going to tell us what happens next. Lucy and Nigel have heard this already. if I've just put the jam on the scone, Nigel is about to put the cream on top of the jam, and Lucy is going to wave her on. No, that's not the way. That's not the right way around. Where I come from, that's the right way around. So sorry, Lucy. Nigel.
That's quite all right, John, and please don't put anything in the chat, guys. You know, you put your jam and your cream whichever way you want to. It doesn't matter.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Nigel, tell us what's happening next, because this is the exciting bit.
Thank you very much, John. And incidentally, I'm in awe because you said you would hand over to me at about 5:25. That's exactly the time on my laptop. So
I do it to scare people.
Suitably impressed. I mean, as we've talked about already, and we know the lighting industry has been through a revolution in technology. And had we been having this discussion 10 years ago, the mantra would have been energy efficiency, energy efficiency, energy efficiency. What John's alluded to, and what I'm going to cover, is material efficiency. What we need to do is to be good guardians of the materials that John was talking about, copper, aluminium, etc., that are becoming increasingly in short supply, and the production of which, and the extraction of which, is very carbon intensive. So the more we can keep product in circulation for longer and not require more copper, more aluminium, etc., the better we will be in a situation as a planet, frankly. And so I'm going to suggest a number of steps that companies of all shapes and sizes should be considering to really reduce their environmental impact, and with an eye to a material efficiency. And the first one is to really live and breathe the waste hierarchy. We've probably all heard about the waste hierarchy: reduce, reuse, recycle. And it's a hierarchy. You reduce the number of products you're buying or using, or you then try to reuse them. And only if you can't do either of those do you actually recycle them. But we really need to make sure we're putting it into practice. Reduce. Do we need to replace all the fittings? Do we need the number of fittings that we're specifying? Can we make better use of daylight? Let's look at reuse. Are there opportunities to prioritize refurbishment? Can those T8 fittings be repurposed so that they're upgraded to LED fittings? And there's a number of companies that are doing that already now. And that's a very simple approach, and it means that the fitting's still in place, and all of the carbon caught up in that product is not lost, because when you take it out and you recycle it, you lose all the embedded carbon. So can we get away with reusing more product? Yes, in some ways, taking this type of approach reduces for some of us the revenues we're going to be getting. I run a recycling scheme. Actually, we make our money by recycling. I'm trying to encourage a reduction in the amount of recycling and an increase in the amount of reuse. But I'd prefer to do that and be able to look myself in the mirror with a clean conscience, knowing that I'm trying to do the right thing for the planet. And so we should only be recycling, really, if all else fails. And really, it is right at the bottom of the pile. Companies and we as individuals tend to think that we're doing our bit by recycling. Sorry, recycling is at the bottom of the pile. It's a last-ditch effort. It's not a good outcome. It's a least worst outcome. So that's the first thing: live and breathe the waste hierarchy. Moving on, though, when we come to purchase equipment, prioritize those companies that have got a demonstrable commitment to the climate. And that's not always easy to spot, because actually everyone now will say they've got that commitment. So it does require a little bit of digging. But first of all, for example, is that commitment visible from the top? Is the is the person at the top really talking about it credibly? Or does it look like it's something that has just been cobbled together on the back of a fag packet in terms of a commitment? And an important one here: do they set short-term targets? A really good way of separating the greenwashers from those who are really trying to achieve something. And perhaps the biggest single problem that is facing us collectively, globally, is the mantra effectively, which is net zero, not within my term of office. In other words, I can say that we'll be net zero by date X, but actually I won't be here by date X. So I can say it all I want because I won't be held accountable for that. And the way of addressing that is to look for short-term targets in companies, as well as the long-term mission statement. And another way of checking the good ones from the less good, are they using an independent body to assess their carbon footprint and their progress towards their goals? And also, what proportion of offsets are they using? Frankly, carbon offsetting doesn't work. I could be more rude and blunt and more accurate, but I'll just stay with that. Carbon offsetting doesn't work. There's not enough carbon offset projects on the planet to cope with the amount of offsetting that might be required. So, and the truth is, it's for some companies, it'd be very easy to just use offsets and say, oh, we're net zero now. For my company, we could spend a relatively small amount of money and we'd be net zero next week. We're not going to do that. We're not using offsetting. We're trying to reduce our carbon footprint as low as absolutely possible. And only if there is some irreducible carbon that we can't get rid of, we might consider offsetting. But really challenge the use of offsets. So we've talked about purchasing new equipment and prioritizing companies that are committed to the climate. Just as an example, my company Recolite incorporate some 20 to 25% of our purchasing criteria and associate those with the carbon credentials and performance of the companies we're choosing to recycle on our behalf. And so that does probably mean it costs us a little more, but we're also comfortable that we know we're doing the right thing for the long term and for the 200 or so producer members of our scheme. Thirdly, I would suggest it's important to prioritize those companies that are taking the circular economy seriously. And the circular economy is again about keeping product in use as long as possible. And there are design criteria out there for this now. The CIBSE Technical Memorandum 66, TM66, is in beta release at the moment. It's not perfect, but it gives a very good introduction to how companies, and an assessment of the extent to which companies are really adopting circular economy principles and implementing those principles within the products they're designing and selling. So asking companies to specify their TM66 credentials would certainly help in identifying good suppliers who are really taking this seriously. It's probably going to take another 6 to 9 months before it really gets going. There's some of the criteria in there at the moment that frankly are very hard to objectively assess, but with some work, TM66 does give the option to really be able to separate the good companies from the also-rans. I would also say, and you might expect me to say this because I come from Recolite, but choose companies that are committed to a proper recycling scheme. And as I said, recycling is at the bottom of the pile, but it's still important to get it done rather than fittings just going to scrap metal or products being landfilled. And there are a lot of WEEE schemes, waste electrical and electronic equipment schemes, that don't operate in the way that Recolite does, which offers a free of charge recycling service to the customers of our members, subject to certain conditions. And so making sure that the company you're buying from is in a WEEE scheme that provides its members with a free of charge recycling service helps it when reuse and other options have failed. Next, I'd ask, and this is perhaps jumping back a little to one of my earlier points, but I'd suggest it's important to develop a nose for greenwash. And just to give some examples of what I would say are greenwash, or at least misguided policies: excessive reliance on offsets, we've talked about that already. Using biodiesel or similar in delivery vehicles. Sorry, if you're still burning something, it's producing CO2 and it's making the climate worse. In fact, there are other problems with biodiesel, because actually we need food as much as possible, and actually to produce crops that are just going into diesel is really not helping the food crisis at the moment. And by the same token, companies that use wood incinerators for generating their energy and heating. Again, if you're burning stuff, you're producing CO2, you're contributing to the climate crisis. But good policies, by contrast, are those, for example, companies that commit to and do in fact purchase all their energy from non-carbon sources, so photovoltaics, solar, and it's quite possible to do that as a company and to make sure that you're buying green energy in the same way that we can as individual householders, and I'm sure many here already do that, buy their energy from green suppliers. Another good example of a good policy is actually just dealing with companies that have gone to the trouble of putting PV panels on the roof. It's a complete no-brainer, and it beggars belief for me that we still have building regulations that don't require PV panels, don't require air source heat pumps, don't require EV charging points, etc., etc. So at least you working with companies that have done that gives you a good indication that actually they're committed to doing the right thing. I would also encourage us all to walk the talk ourselves in our business life. And so, for example, I've talked about reuse of lighting equipment. Well, let's get involved in buying reused products ourselves as businesses. So, for example, do you always need to buy new IT, new laptops, new phones, or is it possible to get those refurbished, upgraded? If you need to buy a new laptop, can you buy one which has been sent back to the manufacturer and upgraded rather than brand new? Let's really walk the talk. Consider the climate in every purchase we make in the same way that we should be doing when we're looking at projects for customers. And obviously there's a million other policies in there, like the energy we purchase, the way we travel, the way we communicate. It's great that this is an online discussion, because obviously there's no travel involved that is problematic there. And finally, there is an increasing number of companies that are looking at and investigating ways in which they can refurbish light fittings. So they will look to take back used fittings that company X doesn't want. They will look to refurbish them, where necessary, upgrade them to LED and sell them again back onto the market. There is a standard BS 8887 which is being developed at the moment, which will help to give us all some confidence that those products are being produced to appropriate standards and are still compliant with appropriate standards and requirements. But I would encourage us all to actively seek out and consider and encourage the implementation of reused products, because again we're not losing the embedded carbon of the fitting, and instead we are we're just tweaking the product, putting it back into service, and it's got a new life. And I think I would hope with time we will start to see a mindset change in companies and customers that increasingly are willing to accept reused product because it's so clearly, in some instances, it will be the best environmental solution. So there we are, finishing at 17:40, giving time for questions. And so I'll hand back to Lucy. Thank you very much.
Oh, those are both really good talks. Thank you so much, John and Nigel. Nobody's yet put anything in the chat, and I've got about 15 questions, so I'm going to start off.
All right, go on then.
Go on, John.
Well, I was just going to just go on immediately from where Nigel stopped there.
Okay.
And just to impress on everyone that this is new stuff. It's old stuff and it's new stuff. Because we're talking about salvage, and we all know about architectural salvage. We know where to get that stuff from. Nobody knows where to get a second-hand light fitting from, because nobody does it. Everybody chucks them in the skip and away they go. My vision is that every town has its remanufacturing center, and what we need is, if you're looking for an analogy here, it's the second-hand book market. If you want any book that's ever been published, it's all you need to do is just, I don't know, Google it or Amazon it, or somebody will have it, and it will be out there. What we will need in this brave new world will be that kind of database. When someone says, I'm looking for 100 of these, has anybody got anything? And have a database that can actually do that search and come up with there's somebody up in Tyneside who might have it. Put them on the train, get it down here. It is new. We've got manufacturers who are happy to be developing remanufacturing techniques for their own product. People who are happy to go into premises where light fittings are already installed and relighting them in situ. So taking out old fluorescents, taking out exhausted LEDs and replacing them with new generation stuff. Light fittings, there's only two things that fail. The electronic driver, or the transformer, if you like, and the LED light source itself. As time goes on, bits of plastic will perish, but it's those two things which need to be looked after, and they're the things that can drive this. Because I've got a light fitting in my home which is over 40 years old, and all I've been doing for 40 years is I've been changing the light bulb. It's as simple as that, and that's what we're aiming to get back to. That's all I wanted to say, Lucy.
Lovely, thank you, John. And we are getting some questions coming in the chat. Thank you very much. So I'll just say a few things, Nigel, to your talk. Are you able? Is there a way that we could have a copy of that fantastic list that you gave, of the kind of checks that we should use? And there you go. Yeah, well, that's similar to what I've just written down. But
actually, I don't mind putting them onto an A4 sheet if that would be helpful.
That would be great. Thank you. And related to that, I've been working in this sort of materials field for several decades, and what I've found very difficult is to get accurate, independent information from the manufacturers, because they will always tell you what they think you want to hear. So as an example, about 30 years I started calling manufacturers using aluminium to say how much recycled aluminium was in their products, and just about everybody would say, well, we can't guarantee the quality of the recycled aluminium, so we use virgin bauxite every time. Now if you ask, everybody's clambering to tell you what percentage of aluminium they're using. So things are changing, but it's always very difficult to be sure that they're telling you the truth. And then my final point, sorry, I just want to get this one in, is in your waste hierarchy there is another one which is downcycling. So manufacturers often say they're recycling something and they're actually downcycling. I wondered if you and John wanted to address that, and then I'll go to the ones in the chat.
Yeah, as I say, I'll put my my points on a document. So what was the first question you asked, Lucy? And I should have made a note of it.
It was how you guarantee the information for the manufacturers.
Oh yes, okay. To me, actually, definitely does help to ask what third-party organisation has been involved in the assessment, because you're right, it is often difficult, and there are companies that have got a very good track record of telling the truth and being you know, but not all are in that in that same group, and I can appreciate that it will be difficult to be able, you know, to reliably verify data that is being provided. So independent third party is always going to help. The TM66 specification is likely to be subject to third party certification. We as an organization are looking at providing a third party certification service for that. And what that means is that we look at the company's data, but then check it, and then based on that give our opinion as to what their TM66 score is. I mean, it still doesn't stop people from being you know, from effectively or very effectively pulling the wool over our collective eyes, but it makes it that bit harder. And I think there is TM66 has got a lot of mileage in being able to help us to really compare apples with apples. It has the opportunity to level the playing field, and does tackle some of the value engineering problems that John mentioned earlier on. And finally, regarding downcycling, you're absolutely right. It's often very, very challenging to actually keep the materials that are in a product and recycled as those same materials. And so, you know, there is good recycling and bad recycling. I guess I would still prefer to focus on reuse and the issues higher up the hierarchy, rather than worry too much about the different approaches to recycling. I think if we're really going to make a difference in material efficiency, we've got to be keeping product in use for far longer.
Great.
We had a conversation in the BS 887 working party about what is effectively downcycling, and this was around the issue that if you take at the moment there is a reusing 1950s industrial fixtures is on trend, they tell me. Which means that what is on trend is that you can take a fixture which might have been originally designed for chemical works and was explosion proof, but it's actually very important that if somebody downcycles, somebody else knows that is no longer explosion proof. So
Okay.
when you know, we downcycle for reasons of fashion in this instance. So we have to know what it is that we're doing. Is one of the reasons why there are companies out there doing very, very good work of turning really crappy light fittings into very nice light fittings to hang over your dining table, and it's easy stuff. The real issue around 887 and remanufacturing is that we want to be able to relight commercial buildings with old light fittings. So that's not a down cycle.
And actually that leads me very nicely, thank you John, both of you, to Debbie's questions. So Debbie's from the ASBP, the Alliance for Sustainable Building Products. If you haven't come across them, they're a fantastic organisation looking at all kind of aspects of natural building materials. We run an event with them once a year. What Debbie is asking is, what are the main barriers to remanufacture and reuse? So that kind of follows on from what you're saying, John.
Do you want that one, Nigel? Sorry.
Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, sure. What are the main barriers to remanufacture?
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
To me, at least part of it is demand, actually. I think there is a bit of chicken and egg in that there are a number of companies that are looking to supply and are saying, but there's no demand. But ultimately, it's about customers, and actually, if more customers are going to, will start including the option for reused product in their specification, then I think we'll get more companies saying, well, hang on, I've got commercial advantage, competitive advantage, if actually I can meet that type of requirement. And there are certainly companies now that are looking to take back their own product and upgrade it, leadify it. And in some ways, the original manufacturer is often, not always, but often going to be the company that is best able to undertake that remanufacturing. But yes, I think demand is probably the biggest issue. Certainly, that inevitably one of the things that limits that demand will be concerns about compliance, and so that's why BS 8887 is so important, because that gives us all the confidence that actually it's going to be remanufactured in a way that doesn't compromise compliance.
There's an argument that I hear fairly regularly amongst the sort of the commodity manufacturers, and they say quite simply, you cannot make a remanufactured fitting cheaper than a new fitting, so why should we bother? Which is, which sounds sort of pretty much, the death knell of remanufacturing before you've even started. But what's been missed here is that might be true today. But when we start to think about what the immediate future might be bringing in terms of environmental taxation, if you're going to be using virgin aluminium, virgin steel, whatever it might be, that there is no, Nigel, you talked about this the other day, that something that's already been remanufactured has no cost to it because it's already there. But that we were talking about the WE directive there, weren't we? But
in WE terms, that's true. You don't have to redeclare a reused product. But obviously there is still cost involved in the refurbishment of it. But yes, you're right. The WE element would fall away.
So what we're expecting is that the cost of new light fittings will increase because of their demand for new material. And what we will then be looking for is the ability for remanufactured product to be viable commercially, because A, it is not a big difference in price, and also B, reputationally, and we mustn't forget reputational management amongst the end users, that to be seen to be doing the right thing will have enormous value. But those are the things that Nigel said, things that I've said, those are the barriers at the moment.
Lovely, thank you guys. We have some other really interesting comments and questions I'd like to get through. Margot, who's an architect, she says, who might be, as an architect who might be specifying fittings, how can we identify the rogues? We need to know who they are. So is there a name and shame list for people to avoid?
I'll take this one.
I'm very pleased, John, because I was going to elegantly sidestep it.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think this one's very firmly in my court. Here's a starting point. Although there are some very good companies out there, if you just want a general rule of thumb, do not specify from wholesalers. And there are some very good wholesalers out there, but they are possibly angels swimming in murky waters. I think that's probably a mixed metaphor, but nevertheless, you know where I'm going. I like to look my manufacturers in the eyes. So I do not like specifying through the internet, unless I'm specifying from a company that I know on the internet. But if I'm looking to specify, I want to know who I'm dealing with. I want to know where they live. I want to know their inside leg measurement. I want to know everything about them, so that when things go wrong, and things do go wrong, you are likely to get the response that says, we'll be there. I've got there's a job down in Poole. I put in what I consider to be the best quality fixtures to go on a 6 meter high ceiling, so that we could get them up and get them out of the way. We can forget about them for the next 10 years. We've had 2 fail. The replacements are already on site. So you need to know that you've got that kind of response from the people that you're dealing with.
And actually, not everybody has that knowledge, John. So it's coming to people like you and to Nigel, who've already done that research. That you can signpost them to people.
Well, but I mean, it's a question of, whoever is responsible for that specification has got to put some effort. Sorry, I'm not being rude. Needs to put the effort in to go. Okay, even you know, sometimes it's almost just ring somebody up. If you can't ring anybody up, don't deal with them.
John, is it fair to say if you ask the company, for example, for the base test data upon which their compliance is claimed, actually, if they can show you a test report from a third party, that's also a good indicator that they're likely to be a better company.
Is that data available? There is a company, and I'm going to see them tomorrow. And when I first had the rep down to see me, I thought, I'm not going to deal with you guys because I know you. So I did that. I did exactly that. I said, of course, you're going to let me. You're going to have to send me all your data, otherwise I will never specify you. And 48 hours later, my inbox was full of data, and I trust that data was genuine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so good companies, yeah, they will prove themselves. That sometimes the job's not worth it. You're trying to put half a dozen downlights in a hallway. I mean, what are you going to do about that? Well, what you do about that is that you do a little bit of research and you find out who to talk, and you talk to them, and you do not get caught up in there's a cheaper one that I can buy from my local wholesaler. And do not trust the electricians to do a good job for you, other than a very good installation, because that's what they're good at. But they use wholesalers as banks. They buy fittings on 30-day payments. They get payments from the client before they actually have to pay the wholesaler. Therefore, they're in the wholesaler's pocket, and therefore, what the wholesaler chooses to do is what the electrician uses. Okay. Sorry,
that's great, Margot. Thank you for that question. That was very thoroughly answered, John. Thank you. Russell makes the good point. There are all sorts of items for reuse on eBay. You know, my daughter's just refurbished her entire house on FreeCycle. There are other ways you can get stuff. You know, because it's a light and it's electricity, and we have 240, you know, I think we do have to be aware of the safety and so on of older things. But that was a good point, Russell. Salome, I don't know if you're in Ireland, but she said, is the TM61 also valid for Ireland?
Just to say, I love FreeCycle. I think it's fantastic. So I love putting stuff on there and picking stuff up.
Great.
TM66, actually not 61, is a specification that was developed by the SLL, the Society of Light and Lighting, as part of SIBC, but it's just a specification. So I think, you know, there's no reason why a company in Ireland could not consider using it, or anywhere else for that matter.
Thank you. Robert says the major problem seems to be the increasingly regular updating the design of items by manufacturers, you know, fashion, making them rapidly obsolete when spare parts are not available. I think that's a broader problem, isn't it, about inbuilt obsolescence. And Robert asks, should this be legislated for?
It is being.
There are companies who I do work with, and they guarantee any spare part for 10 years. They also consider themselves to be pretty dull and pretty boring in their product range, and that's why.
And it's also likely that we will start to see legislation that does require companies to hold spare parts, or at least actively encourages them and incentivizes them to do so. And it's one of the other criteria within TM66 as well. I mean, the more modular products are, actually, the more you can keep them in circulation, because actually if one bit fails, you just pull out that bit and replace it, rather than having to remove the whole device.
What do you both think about, I mean, I think it's in Germany where white goods manufacturers are obliged to receive their appliances back. And so they're now designing for longevity, because they don't really want to have to take back non-functioning appliances. So it's resetting the mind of the manufacturer for longevity.
Yes.
change actually, but it's quite intriguing. I mean, it's what's referred to as individual producer responsibility. So the individual producer should be responsible for their product if it when it reaches the end of life, regardless of whether it's within guarantee or not. So yeah, I quite like that German idea, and yes, our government actually, in fairness, are looking at how they can implement circular economy legislation in the UK, and it wouldn't surprise me if that wasn't one of the issues that they might be considering.
This is being looked at in the States as well, with an extended manufacturer warranty, or whatever they want to call it, which puts the responsibility on the manufacturer for what happens to the whatever it is towards the end of its life. There's a kickback against it, because people are saying, well, we've sold it, it's not ours anymore, it belongs to the user. And I heard an argument last week that said we should have extended user liabilities, and so it's the user who needs to do all of this. It's not the manufacturer. We made it, we sold it, move on.
Well, it's kind of the concept of leasing something, isn't it? You sort of lease a washing machine and then it goes back. I'm aware of the time, and I think you've already slightly answered this, John, about the 10-year warranty on one of the products you're referring to. But Debbie asks, is there a perception that reused products will not last as long as new products?
It is a perception. I don't know whether it's justified or not. I suspect the extent to which it will last depends in part on the quality of the original product and of the remanufacture. But frankly, if we buy stuff from Alibaba, it's quite likely that actually some good reused products may well last significantly longer than the product that we're buying from an online marketplace, for which we have no knowledge of the manufacturer or the standards to which it's being built.
If we're talking about replacement of light source and replacement of electronics, those components will be brand new and should have the same longevity as the ones that were there originally. One of the issues we're talking about, because we've got LED light engines that can last for 20 years, that it is absolutely viable that in the same way that I bought my car secondhand, I don't expect it to have 0 miles on it, and the price reflects the mileage that it's done. The issue then is knowing how many hours a light fitting has actually burned. And as we said, that's just in the chip. What do you mean we haven't got it in the chip? Can we put it in the chip? Yes, we can put it in the chip. So we should be able soon to be able to analyze what an LED engine has done, how many hours it's gone. And yeah, it won't last as long because it's already lived a third of its life, in the same way that my motor car will have lived 25% of its life before I bought it.
That's very interesting. So we've come to the end of the session, and I know people are going to want to go and cool off and eat and so on. Thank you very, very much, Nigel and John. That was a fantastically interesting conversation. And actually, it is the first of a series of events that the Green Register are running on the circular economy, culminating in our end of year conference, which we are delighted to say, short of something catastrophic happening, we are going to have face-to-face on the 8th of December, so that you're getting this first from us, because it's not even on our website yet, on the circular economy. So that's the 8th of December. We've also got a session on the 5th of October with some architects at Race Cotton, talking about life cycle analysis in a bit more detail. We haven't got too much more before the summer break. We don't have another Twilight talk until September, which will be on the Active Buildings Centre in Gloucestershire. Active buildings are buildings that not only generate sufficient electricity to supply their own needs, but it's surplus and they redistribute it to other buildings. So that will be the second Monday, as always. But there is one more before the break, which is on the 18th of July. We're running a session on the updates to building regulations, particularly Part L and Part F. That's conservation of fuel and power and ventilation. And I'm delighted to say it's actually being run by Ian Maudet, who was the author of many of the revisions to Part L. So a very useful technical session there on the 18th of July. So it just remains to say thank you again to Nigel and John, if you'd like to stay on the line just for a minute with me and Elaine, and have a good evening, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good night.